Picture this. A Russian air defense radar station somewhere outside Sevastopol lights up in the middle of the night. The operators expect the usual threats, maybe a cruise missile, maybe a reconnaissance aircraft. That's what these systems were built for. That's what the manuals teach. But this time the radar doesn't show one target, or five, or even 10. It shows dozens, then hundreds. Tiny signals, slow signals, cheap signals, but signals everywhere, moving across the Black Sea, climbing over the coast, spreading across the radar screen like insects hitting a windshield at highway speed. And suddenly the operators realize something terrifying. They cannot shoot them all down. Because every interceptor missile fired by systems like the S-400 Triumph or Pantsir S-1 costs hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. The incoming drones? Some cost less than a used motorcycle. That's not a military problem. That's an economic ambush. For decades, Russia built one of the most sophisticated air defense networks on Earth. Layered systems, long-range radars, missile batteries stretching across the country from Kaliningrad to Vladivostok. On paper, it looked untouchable. But drone warfare doesn't attack strength. It attacks math. And over the past 2 years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, something extraordinary has started happening, something that analysts from Royal United Services Institute to Institute for the Study of War have begun quietly warning about. Russia's air defense network is being saturated, not by stealth bombers, not by fighter jets, but by swarms of small, expendable machines launched in waves, built in garages, assembled in factories that did not exist 3 years ago. This isn't just battlefield improvisation. It's a strategic shift. Because when thousands of cheap drones collide with a defense system designed for expensive aircraft, something remarkable happens. The defense system doesn't just struggle. It starts bleeding money, missiles, and credibility at the same time. And the world's second-largest military suddenly finds itself fighting a new kind of war, one where the most dangerous weapon isn't speed, or power, or stealth. It's quantity. And that shift is rewriting the rules of modern conflict. If you want to understand where this war is going and why militaries from Washington to Beijing are now scrambling to rethink their entire air defense strategy, then you need to understand what drone swarms have done to Russia's defenses. Because by the end of this video, you will understand how cheap drones are overwhelming one of the most advanced air defense networks ever built, and why this could reshape the future of warfare. And if you follow this conflict closely and want analysis that goes deeper than headlines and propaganda, make sure you're subscribed because this story is still unfolding. And the next chapter is already underway. Let's go back to 1991. The dissolution of the Soviet Union had just shattered the largest land empire on Earth. 15 republics broke away. Military bases vanished overnight. Supply chains collapsed. Entire radar networks that once stretched across Eastern Europe suddenly sat inside foreign countries. For the generals in Moscow, this wasn't just political humiliation. It was strategic blindness. During the Cold War, Soviet planners believed the next great war would begin in the sky. Waves of NATO bombers crossing the Arctic. Cruise missiles racing toward command bunkers. Nuclear warheads riding ballistic arcs over the pole. So the Soviet Union built something extraordinary. A layered shield. Long-range interceptors. Dense radar grids. Missile systems stacked like defensive rings around critical cities. Systems that would later evolve into weapons like the S-300 and eventually the more advanced S-400 Triumph. The idea was simple. Detect early. Track precisely. Destroy at distance. And for decades, this doctrine worked. Military historians like Lawrence Friedman have often pointed out that Soviet air defense was not just a weapon system, it was a national identity. A fortress mentality built into the country's strategic DNA. First came the radar rings, then the missile belts, then the mobile systems designed to protect troops in the field, like the Pantsir S-1. Not one layer, not two, but 3 overlapping layers of protection. And for years, Western analysts believed this network might be the most formidable air defense system ever constructed. Reports from organizations like the Rand Corporation warned that penetrating Russia's integrated air defense grid in a conventional war could be extraordinarily difficult. But there was one problem. Actually, three. These systems were designed to destroy fast targets, expensive targets, and limited numbers of targets. Fast aircraft, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles. What they were not designed to fight was something radically different. Thousands of small machines, cheap machines, disposable machines. The kind of machines that can be built not in giant defense factories, but in warehouses, garages, and rapidly expanding drone workshops across Ukraine. This is where the entire strategic equation begins to shift. Because when a defense system built to stop a handful of billion-dollar bombers suddenly faces hundreds of tiny attackers, the logic of the system begins to collapse. Missiles disappear faster than they can be replaced. Radars struggle to prioritize targets. Operators face impossible choices. And slowly, almost invisibly at first, the shield that once defined Russia's military confidence begins to show cracks. This is why what is happening now was always coming. Over 3,000. That's the number of drones Russia claims to have intercepted or engaged across its territory and occupied regions during major attack waves in the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But that number is not just a statistic. It is exhaustion measured in radar blips, thousands of tiny machines forcing one of the world's most advanced air defense networks to fire, track, reload, and fire again. Each interception represents a decision, and sometimes a terrible one. Because when a $20,000 drone forces a $1 million interceptor missile out of a launcher, that's not just combat. That's financial bleeding. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War and the Royal United Services Institute have repeatedly documented a growing pattern. Ukrainian drone strikes arriving not as isolated attacks, but as coordinated saturation waves. First 10 drones, then 20, then 50. Each one probing, distracting, and draining defensive missiles. And then the real target appears. Fuel depots, radar installations, ammunition storage, air bases, precision by exhaustion. But the numbers only tell half the story. Because behind every radar engagement is a human being forced to make impossible calculations. Take the account shared by Russian military bloggers after a drone raid near Belgorod. One air defense operator reportedly described the moment the radar filled with incoming contacts. Not one target, not five, too many to count. He explained the dilemma with brutal simplicity. Every interceptor fired from systems like the Pantsir, S1 protects one site, but empties the launcher. And reloading takes time. Minutes that attackers exploit. Minutes when the sky is suddenly open. Military analyst Michael Kofman has warned that saturation attacks create a psychological problem as much as a technical one. Operators must decide which targets to engage and which to ignore, knowing that ignoring the wrong one could mean a strike on infrastructure or civilians. That decision pressure multiplies every minute the swarm remains in the air. And for what? For a handful of small drones assembled from commercial parts, sometimes costing less than the missile launched to destroy them. For radar operators staring at screens filled with targets that keep multiplying. For commanders watching their most sophisticated defense systems spend millions defending against machines that cost a fraction of that. And slowly, methodically, relentlessly, the balance begins to tilt. Not broken, not collapsed, but strained, severely strained. The math is brutal. If you're watching our channel because you want geopolitical analysis that goes deeper than headlines, the strategic logic, the financial math, the numbers that reveal what propaganda on both sides tries to hide, then make sure you're subscribed. Because stories like this don't end in one video. And the next development is already unfolding. Let's keep going. But here's the part nobody talks about. The real crisis inside Russia's air defense network isn't just the number of drones. It's the missiles. Because interceptor missiles are not infinite. They're industrial products, complex, expensive, and slow to manufacture. Each one requires precision electronics, rocket motors, guidance systems, and supply chains that stretch across multiple factories. And many of those factories were designed for peacetime production rates. That matters. Because when Ukraine launches drone waves against targets in places like Crimea, Russia often responds with interceptors fired from systems like the S 300 or Pantsir S1. Those missiles cost hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. The drones attacking them? Often a tiny fraction of that. This is what military economists call cost imposition warfare. You force your opponent to spend vastly more defending than you spend attacking. According to defense analysis published by the Royal United Services Institute, Ukraine's growing drone industry is producing large numbers of low cost attack UVs precisely for this purpose, not just to hit targets, but to drain Russian defensive inventories. And there is evidence that it's working. Satellite imagery reviewed by analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies has shown air defense batteries being moved repeatedly around the Black Sea region as Russia tries to plug gaps after heavy engagement periods. But here's where the story becomes even more uncomfortable, because interceptor shortages don't just affect the battlefield, they affect the entire country. Every missile launched to defend an oil depot in Sevastopol is a missile that cannot defend an airbase somewhere else. Every battery moved to protect the Kerch Bridge leaves another region thinner. Opportunity cost. A single modern interceptor can cost close to $1 million. For the price of one missile, a government could build schools, fund hospitals, or repair infrastructure. Instead, that money disappears into the sky-chasing machines made from commercial electronics and plastic airframes. And the most revealing insight about this strategy did not come from a government briefing. It came from an independent analysis published by defense researcher Samuel Bendett, who has tracked the rapid expansion of Ukrainian drone production. His conclusion was blunt. Drone warfare is not just about destroying targets. It's about exhausting defenses faster than they can recover. Now, Vladimir Putin's reaction to all of this has been revealing. Because instead of quietly adapting Russia's defense posture, the Kremlin has largely doubled down on the same strategy that built its air defense empire in the first place: more missiles, more batteries, more central control. On paper, it looks decisive. In practice, it reveals something closer to anxiety. Over the past 2 years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Russia has rushed additional air defense systems toward its most politically sensitive assets. Batteries of the S-400 Triumph have been deployed around key locations like Moscow, while shorter-range systems such as the Pantsir S-1 have appeared on rooftops, government buildings, and military bases. Missile belts around the capital, mobile defenses around infrastructure, layer upon layer. But here's the irony. Every system moved to defend the homeland is a system removed from the battlefield. Every battery protecting a political center is one less protecting troops or logistics near the front. Strategists at the Institute for the Study of War have repeatedly pointed out this emerging dilemma. Russia must now defend two skies simultaneously: the skies above the war zone and the skies above its own territory. And the drones keep coming. Because when you suppress a new method of warfare by simply throwing more traditional weapons at it, you don't solve the problem. You expose the system's limits. Again, and again, and again. Consider what happened after a series of drone strikes near Moscow in 2023. The Kremlin responded by expanding defensive coverage and tightening internal security around military facilities. But the attacks did not stop. They multiplied. The more Russia hardened individual locations, the more attackers shifted to softer targets: fuel depots, air bases, logistics nodes. This is the paradox of modern warfare. When you defend everything, you defend nothing perfectly. And when you try to suppress a decentralized threat like drone swarms with centralized systems, the result isn't control. It's strain. The crackdown didn't solve the problem. It baptized it. Because every drone that reaches Russian territory sends a message, not just to the public, but to militaries around the world watching closely. The message is simple. Even the strongest shield can be saturated. And when leaders respond by doubling down on the old strategy instead of adapting to the new reality, the pressure only intensifies. That's not strategic innovation. That's defensive desperation. That's not leadership. That's fear. Here is what the numbers are really telling us. For most of modern military history, air superiority was decided by technology. Faster jets, better radar, more advanced missiles. Nations competed by building machines that were more powerful, more precise, more sophisticated than their adversaries. The country with the most advanced systems usually controlled the sky. That was the old logic. But the events unfolding during the Russian invasion of Ukraine suggest something radically different, something uncomfortable for every military planner on Earth. Because drone swarms don't defeat air defense by being better machines, they defeat it by being more machines. Thousands instead of dozens, cheap instead of exquisite, disposable instead of irreplaceable. Military analyst Michael Kofman has repeatedly warned that modern wars are increasingly shaped by what he calls industrial scale. Not just who has the best weapons, but who can produce the most weapons, the fastest, and replace them when they are lost. And once you look at the war through that lens, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. A sophisticated interceptor missile from systems like the S-400 Triumph may cost close to $1 million. A small attack drone can cost a tiny fraction of that. One side defends with scarcity, the other attacks with abundance. Which brings us to the uncomfortable conclusion. The moment the entire story becomes clear, this is not an air defense failure. This is a cost collapse. 14 words that change everything. Because once warfare becomes a battle of economic endurance instead of technological superiority, the entire strategic equation shifts. You no longer need to destroy the enemy's defenses outright. You simply need to drain them. Historian Lawrence Friedman has written that wars are often decided not by single battles, but by the gradual erosion of an opponent's ability to sustain the fight. That erosion is exactly what drone swarms are designed to create, missile by missile, radar engagement by radar engagement, night after night. And once that erosion begins, something remarkable happens. The most sophisticated defense systems in the world start behaving like something much simpler. Not shields, but accounts. Every engagement becomes a transaction. Every interception becomes a withdrawal. And eventually, even the strongest account can be emptied. And what does this mean for you? Whether you're watching from United States, Germany, or Japan, the stakes are no longer confined to a battlefield in Ukraine or Crimea. The logic behind drone swarms, cheap, scalable, relentless, is now a global blueprint. And it affects everything from energy to economics to national security. First, energy and supply chains. Russia is a major exporter of oil and gas. Drone attacks against infrastructure, fuel depots, pipelines, ports create disruptions felt across Europe and Asia. The more air defenses are forced to react, the more vulnerable the supply lines become. If Russia's ability to defend these assets erodes, energy prices spike, heating bills soar, and global industries feel the pinch. Second, financial markets and economic stability. The economic logic of drone swarms, forcing expensive defenses to engage cheap attacks, is a blueprint for asymmetric warfare that can ripple through global markets. Countries that once believed they were insulated from conflict now see hidden costs of war emerging in stock markets, insurance premiums, and defense budgets. Investors are forced to reconsider risks that were once theoretical. Third, military and strategic balance of power. China, watching closely, has already invested heavily in autonomous drones, swarm technologies, and AI targeting systems. NATO planners are revising air defense doctrines. Even the US military is experimenting with defensive systems capable of handling saturation attacks. The key lesson is clear: air supremacy is no longer guaranteed by expensive, centralized systems. Smaller nations or non-state actors could now challenge previously untouchable powers. If X happens, drones drain Russian defenses and inspire copycats elsewhere, then Y changes. Conventional air superiority becomes far less reliable. Which means Z, nations must rethink deterrence, homeland defense, and military-industrial investments. Every citizen is indirectly affected in energy bills, national security planning, and even the shape of future conflicts. Foreign policy experts like Francesca Giovannini have warned that understanding these dynamics is no longer optional. Ignoring them risks strategic surprise that could cascade across continents. This is not just a story about Ukraine or Russia. This is a story about the future of global power, resource control, and the very logic of modern war. Understanding it is an act of civic intelligence. There are two paths from here. Path one, adaptation and containment. Russia recognizes the cost collapse reality and begins restructuring its air defense strategy. Missile production is ramped up. Autonomous drone killing systems are deployed. Command and control becomes decentralized. Ukraine's drone swarms are countered by layered AI guided interceptors and rapid production of replacement batteries. In this scenario, the war stabilizes, attrition slows, and Russia recovers partial control over its airspace. The result, a tense equilibrium where both sides respect the new economic calculus of drone warfare, but the cost is immense. Path 2, momentum and vulnerability. Russia fails to adapt quickly enough. Each drone swarm continues to drain missiles, operators burn out, and defense networks thin. Infrastructure becomes exposed, strikes grow more audacious, and Ukraine gains asymmetric momentum. Other nations take note, replicating the swarm strategy for their own asymmetric campaigns. The Kremlin's reputation suffers, military credibility erodes, and global observers begin questioning the efficacy of even the most expensive, elite air defense systems. This is the darker path where technological sophistication meets economic reality, and the loser is always the defender caught unprepared. I think path 2 is more likely than most analysts want to admit. And here is why. Drone production in Ukraine has already reached industrial scale. Cheap, scalable, and difficult to track, these swarms are not a temporary tactic. They're a permanent recalibration of modern warfare. Russia's existing air defense doctrine, while sophisticated, is fundamentally mismatched for a battle of abundance. Without radical adaptation, every engagement continues to impose financial and operational strain, and the consequences extend far beyond Crimea or the front lines. What do you think? Can centralized air defense networks survive the age of swarm warfare, or are we witnessing the death of traditional air supremacy? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one. Remember the radar screens in Sevastopol flooded with hundreds of tiny dots? The operators staring at them, knowing every interceptor missile spent was money and time lost? That image is no longer just a moment in a war. It is a symbol of a global shift. The history books will not be kind to decisions that ignored the logic of abundance. They will record that even the most sophisticated air defense networks, the S-400 Triumph, the S-300, the Pantsir, S-1, could be overwhelmed not by superior technology, but by sheer numbers and strategic ingenuity. This is their real legacy. Not invincibility, not fear, not deterrence. The legacy is exposure, exhaustion, and adaptation forced upon a superpower by a swarm of tiny machines. Still missiles fired. Still radars overloaded. Still strategy rewritten. If you want to track the unfolding chapters of this new age of warfare, subscribe to our channel, because every update matters. If you want your friends and colleagues to understand what the mainstream is missing, share this video and help them see the hidden layers. And if you want to join the debate on whether traditional air defense can survive swarm warfare, comment below. We read them. We want to know what you think. Thanks for watching our channel. We'll see you tomorrow.